Now, here we've got WCW, who very much now they're going to be in the realms of Ted Turner, who's got a checkbook that can match quite a bit. He's got quite a lot behind him. Obviously, he's running Time Warner, and he's got TV station, and it's a massive advantage going on with the networks because he's basically owns his own network. But we're not quite at the war stage here. That's worth pointing that out. We're not quite at those Monday night bits, but what is happening in effect is, and I think that there is a little bit of, like, we saw sort of the Lex Luger kind of thing happen eventually as well, going back there, and that was a big thing. But here we see a point with Hulk Hogan, John, where I think Vince McMahon, I would imagine primarily, especially when he went into WrestleMania 10 and Hogan said, I don't want to be in it. I can't do it. I'm doing filming or whatever. He's doing Mr. Nanny at this point. We know that's getting filmed. He's also filming, what was that TV show?
Thunder in Paradise.
Thunder in Paradise, which hasn't aged well, I'll tell you that much, because I happened to watch that about 3 years ago. I went through the whole bloody lot of them. Don't ask me what for, but yeah, it didn't age well, I tell you that much. And the fascinating thing, he was recording pilots for that at this time. He hadn't quite done it, but he was sniffing around the TV show. So everything was pointing towards Hulk Hogan going into movies. Hogan at this point, he wasn't, to put it mildly, John, he wasn't sort of the Rock in Hollywood at this point. I think Hogan was kind of known as a sort of, he had obviously the no holds barred thing, but I think a lot of it stemmed from who you mentioned earlier in the Rocky film. That was quite a big thing. But let's face it, he was pretty much himself in all that, and it wasn't like he had a starring role in Rocky, but it certainly put him on the map. Now, he'd done these very obscure films up until this point, and Mr. Nanny was I think they were hoping for some massive returns at the box office. I don't think it quite did what they probably imagined. It didn't quite resonate with the sort of Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger of the times, box office action hero. But certainly on name power, I think if you as a film studio, you'd go, yes, that's the guy we need. We need Hulk Hogan, can play in these kind of family movies, big jacked up guy. It's going to be funny. He's running around like Mr. Nanny, blah, blah, blah. Didn't quite pan out that way, did it, John? I don't know if you remember many of his films, but he had a very strange career and dabble into Hollywood, didn't he?
He did. And, I think he was kind of, he made a name for himself as just doing these family films that were semi-big and would make a bit of money. I compare a lot of Hogan's films to when The Rock did The Tooth Fairy, and but before kind of he really hit the mainstream and was getting booked for the big movies. The Rock was doing the films like The Tooth Fairy, and that's the type of level that Hogan was kind of at his peak as an actor, to be honest with you. But one quite important thing is, a couple of important things really. When he lost the WWF Championship to Yokozuna at King of the Ring 93, a lot of people thought that he was done with the wrestling business, that he was going to focus on film, like you said, and that because he was essentially gone from the WWF, that he was gone from the wrestling business. That was him done. But he did a stint over in Japan, and although he wrestled for New Japan many years earlier, and possibly New Japan and All Japan. I know that he had some memorable matches against Antonio Inoki, but he went between 93 and 94. He went back to Japan. So then that kind of pricked a lot of people's interest as to whether Hogan was done with the wrestling business. And then, of course, when Ted Turner was trying to build on WCW, they went to Hogan. Now, I think traditional WCW fans were not happy about it because they'd always modeled themselves on being a more serious product, less gimmicky, better matches, better in-ring product. You had big monsters there like Vader, who wasn't cartoony at the time at all. He's very, very serious, no nonsense, big man, heel, and so many other kind of established wrestlers. You had stunning Steve Austins, and you had the Ricky Steamboats and the Stings of this world. and Ron Simmons and various others, kind of more straight-laced traditional wrestlers. And then, like I say, that they signed Hogan to the biggest deal that they've ever presented to a wrestler in WCW. And then the more traditional WCW fan were unhappy about that because they thought that they were going more cartoony by hiring Hulk Hogan, who kind of left WWF on a bit of a whimper, to be honest with you. It wasn't anything to be celebrated, and that they were kind of almost taking the scraps of what Hulkamania used to be a few years earlier.
Yeah, it's. I mean, if you're WCW, you're Ted Turner, you just got this. You know, arguably, if Hogan's available, you're gonna ask that question. But like you say, I think in Vince McMahon's head, he never saw this happening. I think he thought Hogan was done. His love had been, the passion wasn't there. And you know, it's time to move on. What I will say is not to underestimate Hogan's drawing value, because WCW signing Hogan, merchandise-wise, kids and all that lot, I mean, you've just got yourself like such a massive chunk of WWF in one guy, in one swoop. Almost with Hogan. It shouldn't be underestimated. And obviously, I think if we were to play and we look back at Ric Flair going to WWF, like what is the bigger? I think you'd say Hogan going to WCW was much more impactful for WCW because they saw this guy and they embraced everything that he could bring, especially in terms of the fan power and what potentially could be. You remember those scenes when he first turned up? I think they'd done it at the Disney studios. You know, they had this massive media surge of finding out about this. What do you think Vince McMahon's reaction was when he found out that day? Do you think he was one of shock? And you know, now that we've got some trouble, was this one of the first times you think that like the first shot was taken, that there might be some competition coming our way?
Yeah, I think definitely, and I think Vince McMahon would have thought, right, okay, you know, the first shot's definitely been fired. I'm sure he was upset by the news that they'd signed Hogan, but then I think even Vince McMahon naively thought that Hogan was past his best and that he wouldn't be able to offer what he offered WWF back in his prime. So maybe he thought that they were getting a watered down Hogan, but you know, it always seemed to kind of revitalise and re-energise Hogan. Yeah, I mean, he certainly wasn't the Hogan of the 80s, but it also gave him an opportunity to kind of start afresh under a fresh banner. And, you know, there were differences. You know, he's still dressed in the red and yellow, still had Jimmy Hart by his side. The music was different, which was strange, and the fan base was different, but they were bringing in a new audience as well. So I think it was a bit of an unknown entity. Obviously, Ted Turner was confident that he'd had a fantastic acquisition in Hulk Hogan, this big Hollywood name or semi big Hollywood name. But I think McMahon was probably thinking, well, they can have him. As disappointed as I am, I think they've got a watered down Hogan compared to what I had.
Yeah, I definitely think that. Now, I think in Hogan's point of view, this for me, I mean, if you're Hulk Hogan, this still makes absolutely perfect sense. You know that. Yeah, I think Vince was offering contracts, but not anywhere near the financial stability that he would get at WCW. But not only that, Hogan knew that WWF was going in a different direction. You know, he knew that years before. He was a smart guy. He knew that the whole Bret Shawn thing was going to come along. These Kevin Nash, you know, it was going in a different direction. And not only that, one thing that WCW could really offer, and especially Time Warner, especially Ted Turner, was the films. They were going to put Hogan on this film contracts where he could do films, because obviously they have their own studios. And that was another big part of it. He's going to work less schedule. He's going to have more time to do the films. And it's a kind of win-win scenario here, because he gets to be Hulk Hogan at the same time of doing the films, running parallel, which obviously makes perfect sense. You're getting exposure. You're going to get all your adverts to wrestling fans to go and watch your stuff. So there's a lot of layers to this, why this works out perfectly well, in my eyes anyway. And yes, you know, as they say, that was history. The rest is history there. Hogan flies over on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I was disappointed when they signed Hogan. I mean, I didn't look at it from a business standpoint. I looked at it from a wrestling fan's perspective. Sure. And being a fan of WCW, and I'm sure you were at the same time as well, you know, you had, you know, all these great memories of, you know, Sting and Vader, Cactus Jack, Ron Simmons, you know, the Dangerous Alliance, the Four Horsemen. And then here was kind of Hulk Hogan coming in. A lesser version of Hulk Hogan in my eyes, in my opinion. At the time, I thought his better days were past and his popularity were behind him, and I felt that this was kind of the turn where they almost turned a serious product into more of a Mickey Mouse product because of what Hogan was bringing to it in terms of the more family friendly image, I suppose. And I think that that's possibly what a lot of other wrestling fans were thinking at the time as well, and possibly what a lot of the talent were thinking as well. But then on the flip side, from the business standpoint, yes, he's going to bring more eyes to the product, potentially bring more people to the arenas, you know, help drive merchandise sales, not just for him, but for everybody else. And of course, you know, bigger attendances, bigger pay-per-view buy rates means bigger paychecks for everybody. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but from a fan's perspective, I was not looking forward to Hogan joining WCW.
Absolutely. No, I get that. I can't really remember what my feelings were. I think I've become so enthralled with Brett at this point that I wasn't too fussed, at least him going. And I think in WCW, I was watching it then, but I was more into Sting. I was more gearing towards Sting and Hogan as being like two big things coming together than I was Ric Flair at the time. Being the match. But let's get to this match now then, because, you know, straight in, no hanging about here, John. WCW, Bash at the Beach, Hogan's first in-ring on TV is going to be pay-per-view against, of course, none other than Ric Flair, the then WCW champion. They do not wait at all for this, to just have this match. And they really, within the span of the month from when they signed him to that pay-per-view, they really kind of went to town on selling this to you as pretty much like I described what maybe WWF should have done in '92, as that this is two worlds coming together.
They jumped on the dream match that should have happened.
They absolutely did. So let's get that to you, to the guys. So fans and listeners can check this out now. So again, fire up the WWE Network. And you want to go to the WCW section of things now, and you want to go down to, you can either go onto the Bash of the Beach and you want to find 1994, or you can do it by the year 1994 and find it as well quite easily in that part. And the time that you want to get on this one is 2 hours, 1 minute and 24 seconds. I think that's right. 2 hours, 1 minute and 24 seconds. So guys, just hit the pause button on the podcast while you guys find that, and then come back on when you have done. And on the count of one, we are going to eventually get what maybe WWF had lost out in terms of the big promotion, the big promoting for a pay-per-view match anyway, on this one. So let's go with this then, on the count of 1, 3, 2, 1. I haven't seen this match in bloody ages, so I have no idea what we're going to expect. The one thing I do know is they really overdo this intro to it. So I do know that. You'll notice as well, you've got Michael Buffer out there doing the ring announcers. Of course, he's well known in boxing as well. One thing I do want to ask you just quickly, John, I don't know if you've got the answer to this. You might have just thrown you a curveball here on this one, but in terms of legal stuff with Hogan's likeness and stuff like that, like obviously he didn't have his music, but then he's wearing the yellow, he's wearing the red, he's Hulk Hogan to this point. I'm assuming at this point WWF didn't trademark or have the intellectual properties that they would then go to maybe on events like this happening. Maybe that's when they decided to do that. But am I right in thinking they didn't have any ownership on Hogan likeness?
Yeah, I can only assume. Yeah, I can only assume that Hogan owned the rights to his character, or his likeness, or his image. Now, of course, you know, I know that whether it be WWF, WCW, Hulk Hogan, they had to get the rights from Marvel because of the Hulk name and originally taking it from the Incredible Hulk. Now, I know that there is some sort of tenuous